I want to go ahead and preface this video by saying we don't really know for sure which Egyptian princess adopted Moses as a baby. One theory is that the princess was Hatshepsut, who herself went on to serve as Pharaoh, which throughout Egyptian history it was pretty rare for a woman to hold the title of Pharaoh. I'm not totally convinced Hatshepsut was Moses' adoptive mother, but I would say I would at least put it in the category of being plausible. With that said, in this video I'm going to be sort of analyzing why I think Hatshepsut might have adopted Moses, who, if the theory is true, was called Senenmut in Egyptian history. I'm not going to elaborate in great detail here about why Senenmut might be the Egyptian name of Moses, and why his adoptive mother might have been Hatshepsut, but I'll link to another video in the description that delves into that topic in more detail if you're interested. For this video, I'm just going to kind of go ahead and roll with the idea that Hatshepsut is the adoptive mother of Moses, and what might have been going through her mind when she did that. I'm wondering what her motivation might have been. I will give a brief overview of the scenario, though. Hatshepsut was the fully royal daughter of Thutmose I and his great royal wife, Thutmose I. It's thought Thutmose I did not have any sons with her, but only with a minor wife named Mutnefret. So before Thutmose I dies, he has one of his sons with Mutnefret marry his royal daughter Hatshepsut, which is weird and gross, but it was common for Egyptian royalty to marry siblings, so it wouldn't have seemed weird to them. So his son, who would be Thutmose II, was not fully royal because he wasn't the son of the royal queen, but of a minor wife. So he's only half royal. The crown would only pass to male heirs, though, so having the half-royal Thutmose II married to the fully royal Queen Hatshepsut would give a higher level of legitimacy to their offspring. At least that's what I think they were thinking. Their royalty. They tend to be concerned with things like preserving their royal lineage and not mixing with commoners. So moving on a little further in the story, Thutmose II has a daughter with Hatshepsut and a son, the future Thutmose III, with a minor wife named Iset. Thutmose II doesn't live very long, and when he dies, Thutmose III is only 2 years old. At this point, since Thutmose III is too young to rule, Hatshepsut ruled as co-regent and essentially serves as Pharaoh herself, even though she is his stepmom, being that she was queen and the fully royal daughter of his grandfather Thutmose I. Hatshepsut was in more of a position to rule than his own mother, who was only a minor wife of Thutmose II. So just to recap here, Thutmose I married off his half-royal son with his fully royal daughter to continue his line, and then his half-royal son has a son with a minor wife instead of the fully royal Queen Hatshepsut. So as far as royal lineages go, Thutmose III would have only been like a quarter royal. And royal blood wasn't an important distinction to these people. Royal families, or at least their royal heir apparents, have tended to marry only members of their own family or other royal families throughout the rest of history. They tend to have a high opinion of themselves and want to keep their blood and power consolidated within their own families. Anyway, this is where I start wondering what Hatshepsut might have been thinking at this point. Being that she was a fully royal daughter of Thutmose I, she might have felt it was her duty to produce a royal male heir for her father through her half-brother Thutmose II. When Thutmose II had a son with a minor wife instead and then died, she might have felt her stepson was not worthy enough to carry on her father's legacy. But with Thutmose II dead, she wouldn't be able to have any more offspring with him. Being that Thutmose III was a male, he would inherit the crown despite being only a quarter royal. Hatshepsut viewed herself as the true successor to Thutmose I, though. With that in mind, I'm wondering if Hatshepsut didn't think Thutmose III should continue her father's legacy, who in her mind was probably the last true king. So perhaps she thought she needed to create a new line through herself. This might be where Moses comes into the picture. Of the various officials Hatshepsut had in her court, Senenmut in particular is the one who fits the bill of possibly being Moses the best. Again, if you want more details on why that is, check the link in the description. I'm not going to elaborate on that here, but we're going to just roll with the idea that Senenmut might be Moses. The question here could be if Hatshepsut wanted to create her own royal line, why pick a commoner, especially one that wasn't even Egyptian? I don't know exactly why she would have picked a commoner to elevate to royal status. Perhaps she just had a nurturing nature, and seeing a baby in a basket tugged at her heartstrings. Whatever the reason, in Senenmut's case, he was made to be mother's brother, as in that's literally what the name Senenmut means, mother's brother or brother of mother. That's interesting to me because that essentially elevates him to royal status as the brother of a princess. I don't think Hatshepsut necessarily intended for him to be the next pharaoh. She was probably fine doing that job herself, but she might have wanted him to be the father of the next pharaoh. Now we're getting into what would be a weird age difference here, but she might have wanted to produce an heir through Senenmut herself. Or what I think might have been more likely in this scenario is that she wanted her own daughter to produce an heir with Senenmut. Either way, there's a big, possibly even gross age difference here, but again, it probably wouldn't have seemed weird to them at the time. Obviously, if Hatshepsut had adopted Senenmut, he would have been much younger than her. Senenmut was assigned to be the tutor of Hatshepsut's royal daughter, Nefertari, so he was older than her, but I'm not sure how much older. But let's just say even if he was around 20 years older, it would be a big age gap by today's standards, but probably wouldn't have seemed unusual in ancient Egypt. This could present a problem with the theory because I would actually expect Moses to be younger than Hatshepsut's daughter from the biblical perspective of the story. But with trying to piece together, biblical events with Egyptian events that are written by different people from different perspectives, it's hard to match it up for sure, like I was saying in the beginning. But we may not understand the story completely from the Egyptian side, so we're just kind of piecing it together the best we can. Some details may be missing or mixed up here. Maybe she didn't really want Moses to be the father of the next king. Maybe she just liked him as a brother and just wanted him to be the tutor and architect in her court. Maybe he tutored a different daughter. Maybe later Thutmose III just didn't like having a non-Egyptian uncle and he wanted him gone. I'm just looking at possibilities here. So with all that in mind, Hatshepsut might have been jealous that someone less royal than her was slated to be the king of Egypt when she already considered herself to be the true successor of Thutmose I. So she might have decided to take matters into her own hands. Her daughter Nefertari would have more royal blood in her than Thutmose III because she was the royal daughter of Hatshepsut and Thutmose II. In her mind, and I'm just speculating here, she might have wanted to continue her father's line through her own daughter, which is why she might have intended to marry her daughter to someone whose name means mother's brother, which would give him the royal status that Hatshepsut had. That's not exactly what ended up happening, but I think it might have been what Hatshepsut had planned in her mind. I think you can see how that scenario could create strife within the Egyptian royal family and high society, though. A queen who thinks her stepson isn't royal enough to continue her father's line. Her stepson, though less royal by blood than his stepmother, is a male son of the former king. When he grows up, he might take offense that his stepmother is trying to set up a different line of succession, which might be why he tried to erase Hatshepsut from history. From a biblical perspective, I think you can see how this scenario would fit with the story in Exodus. Moses is adopted by an Egyptian princess. She becomes queen, and then her stepson, king, and her adopted son become rivals. So her adopted son decides to get his people and leave the country, which is what God commanded him to do. But from a purely historical standpoint, I think you can see why Thutmose III and Senenmut would be at odds with each other if they both had claims to the throne and why one of them would end up leaving. So for what it's worth, as I stated in the beginning, we don't really know for sure if Senenmut was Moses. But if you look at the details of his life and the time period he is from, I think it's plausible that he was the biblical Moses, especially when you consider Hatshepsut's reign was one of the Egyptians tried to erase, and historians have had to piece together her reign and Senenmut's story the best they can from what they have found. Maybe all the details don't match up perfectly, but there is enough there to make it plausible, I think. But what do you think? Was Senenmut Moses? Did Hatshepsut want to keep her own line of successors through him? Now, stepping away from a historical view of this and looking at it from a more religious point of view, I wonder if there might be something here about how famous Hatshepsut is as a historical figure. In the Bible, it says Moses was adopted by a daughter of the Pharaoh, but it never names her. Without a name, it makes it hard to learn any more about her. There's a lot of different Egyptian princesses she could have been, but wouldn't it be convenient if she just so happened to be the most famous Egyptian princess who became queen and pharaoh in her own right? Almost as if someone wanted her to stand out as a historical figure, despite the fact that the Egyptians tried to erase her from history, but somehow some statues, buildings, and writings from her reign managed to survive to the present day anyway. Kind of like she's calling out to us from the past, saying, look at me. Wouldn't it just be so convenient if the most famous female Egyptian pharaoh was also the one who adopted Moses? Those are my thoughts on that. Thanks for listening.